Welcome to the Rochester, New Hampshire History Podcast, a monthly show that will shine a light on a piece of history that has been all but forgotten.
Rochester has been home to many beautiful and historic houses. Unfortunately, as buildings age, some fall apart and are destroyed, while other buildings receive the proper care and maintenance. A few of the houses presented here are no longer with us and only exist as a picture or a memory.
The Haven Parsonage on Rochester Hill, named for Joseph Haven, who served for 49 years as the minister of the Congregational Church from 1776 to 1825. The house was built in 1760 and was a common sight for many that traveled between Rochester and Dover. In 2020, the house was demolished due to years of negligence, vacancy, and vandalism. The Jabez Dame House, built in 1758 on Rochester Hill. Jabez served in the French and Indian War and the American Revolution. The house remained in the Dame family until the 1970s. The family sold the house and it was moved to Wisconsin. Here is a current picture of the house in Wisconsin. The Edward Tibbets House. This house was built in the 1700s on Tibbets Road. It served as the homestead for the Tibbets family and also the Squamigonik Hill garrison. The Tibbets House was one of 7 forts in Rochester constructed for protection against Native Americans, similar to the Jabez Dame House. It was purchased and moved out of the city. This building now resides in Hampton, and here is a picture of the Tibbets House in Hampton.
The Torr family homestead. In 1775, Simon Torr built his home on Chestnut Hill Road. It still stands and is one of the city's oldest houses. The John Parker Hale House. John Parker Hale Sr. came to Rochester in 1801 and lived in this large house on South Main Street. His son, John Parker Hale Jr., was born here in 1806. The father, John Sr., passed away in 1819, leaving 13 children fatherless. John Jr. performed odd jobs to help his family, and he also kept up with his studies. He became a lawyer and practiced law in Rochester before he moved to Dover. John became politically active and was elected to the United States Senate. He was a Free Soil candidate for President of the United States in 1842. A large statue of him stands in Concord, New Hampshire. The Simon Chase House. In 1873, Simon Chase purchased the Dearborn Tavern on Main Street. He added a second story to it and made it his home. Just 5 years later, in 1878, Simon sold the house to A.W. Hayes, who then moved the house to Congress Street.
The Dominicus Hanson House, located at the intersection of Hanson and Wakefield Streets. Though Dominicus passed away in the early 1900s, his presence is still felt today. Hanson Street and the beautiful Hanson Pines were donated to the city by his family. The Edwin Wallace House on Grant Street, facing the Common. Edwin was the co-owner of the highly successful Wallace Shoe Company and built this house in 1878. Edwin died in 1894. His son George inherited the house. Unfortunately, George led an excessive lifestyle and by 1910 was in severe financial straits. George sold the house in 1914 to the Catholic Bishop of Manchester, and it was converted to a children's home. The Allen House was built on or around 1734 on land granted to Captain William Allen from the King of England. One winter, 60 people lived there due to the fear of Indian attacks. This house is located in the Walnut Grove section of Salmon Falls Road. The Mansion House on South Main Street. This house was built in 1799 by Captain Samuel Storer. Sometime after 1866, Silas Wentworth made it into a hotel called the Mansion House. Before 1900, it was enlarged and became the City Hotel. It was raised in 1964. The building was located on or around the intersection of Liberty Street and South Main Street. Wilder Neal built this beautiful house on Charles Street around 1900. Neal moved here from Farmington and opened the Globe Crockery and Variety Store in Rochester. The store was well named as it did sell a variety of items, including fireworks, toys, lamps, and other items. The Solomon Evans House was located on Wakefield Street. Around 1900, this house was moved to Upper Wakefield Street and the Rochester High School was built in its place. The high school was short-lived and was razed in the late 1930s. Currently, the Grace Community Church resides in this spot. The next two pictures are of Silver Street in the 1950s. The good old days of the 1950s. The decade is remembered for being the days of prosperity and optimism. Here is the inside of a 1950s Silver Street home. The Dennett and Wallace houses. These two houses were torn down in 1976 and replaced by Friendly's Restaurant. The smaller house on the left was built in 1812 by Charles Dennett, a cabinet maker. He brought his bride Abigail to the home in 1813. The couple raised 9 children in this house. On the right is the Ebenezer Wallace house, built in 1876. Ebenezer was co-owner of the Wallace Shoe Company and died in 1893. The family continued to live in the house until 1973, when Wallace Hussey, a grandson, passed away. The grandest mansion of Rochester was the Sumner Wallace house. In 1901, Sumner Wallace built a mansion on South Main Street, and it was considered one of the most beautiful houses in New Hampshire. Sumner died in 1920, and his widow sold the mansion in 1924. Eventually, the Ku Klux Klan purchased the building, and before you knew it, the mansion became the Northern New England headquarters of the KKK. For 2 years, the KKK occupied the mansion and did their Ku Klux Klan activities, like burning crosses in the yard and spreading hate. They did not find much support in Rochester and could not keep up with the expenses. They sold the mansion to escape the mortgage payments. The building was transformed into a movie theater, then an indoor mini golf course. None of these businesses were successful, and the building was torn down in 1932.
This ends the podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please email bobgriffinpodcast@gmail.com and come back next month for another episode of Rochester, New Hampshire History.